Really quick reminder for people. The first roughly 5 minutes or so of this session got lost in the recording process, so the video seems like it starts super abruptly. Don't worry though, there's not much that you missed. I took some time to introduce myself as well as explain to everybody that unfortunately, due to a computer glitch, my presentation got overwritten, so I had to use an old presentation, and so there may have been some information that I skip over, and there's a couple slides that I actually skip over towards the end and towards the back. But wanted to remind everybody of this fact, and now to get you into the recording on phase 2 and beyond. Mahalo. And now you're actually putting it into effect. You're going, okay, I showed that this can be solved. I have to solve this. So your phase 2 really is about taking that feasibility and pushing forward and going, now I can make this thing. Maybe you work towards a minimum viable prototype. Maybe you actually work towards a customer demonstration, but something that actually has legs now, something that you can almost package. Really what they would like you to get to is, really what they want you to get to is actually something that is really a market-ready prototype. And there's a big difference between prototype and market-ready prototype. Prototypes are typically held together with duct tape, baling wire, and hopes and prayers. You go, God, I really want this thing to work. Market-ready prototypes are, I can manufacture 5,000 of these tomorrow. This is set up. We're ready to go. Everything's figured out. Now, are you going to get there during your phase 2? Probably not. It takes a lot of money to actually do product development. It takes a lot of money and a lot of time to get into a space where you're starting to sell, because that's what you're shooting for at the end of that phase 2. We need to be in the commercial market. We need to be selling. We need to actually be generating revenue. And that commercial market doesn't necessarily mean an outside market. It could actually be a governmental customer. It could be a non-governmental organization. It could be a license. It could be a process. It could be a workflow. To the government, your product is just how you're driving revenue and how you're making money. They don't really care what your product is. Just as long as there's commercial potential, just as long as it's innovative and impactful, and as long as you can set up a healthy, growing, and successful business around it. Now, when you're looking at a phase 2, it is a real big ramp way from that phase 1 where you went, okay, I have to see if this can actually happen. So some of the things that you're going to do in a phase 2 is you have to actually prove out. You had some overall guesses, you had some overall ideas. Now you need to show it. In our next session, when we talk about intellectual property, it actually follows typically the way that people will generate a patent. They'll follow, or they'll actually apply for a provisional. I can't remember the word. They'll apply for a provisional patent that just puts a place in line and says, we think we can figure this out. Then you have a 1-year time period to move from that provisional to a full utility patent or a non-provisional. Very similar here, that phase 1 is, I think I can figure this out. The phase 2 is describe it. Tell us how this works. Show us how it works. Prove it works every single time. Prove it works the way that you think it's actually going to work. So there's going to be a lot of that kind of moving around the things that were a little bit conservative when you described your phase 1 project, and possibly a little bit conservative when you're putting together the work plan. And it's going to be putting a lot of stuff just actually in place. Maybe figuring out some of the manufacturing, maybe figuring out some of the supply chain, the distribution logistics, the things that equate to, I have a prototype to, now I'm actually ready to sell my product. Now, for plans beyond the fundings, you can really compare them. Do that. So when you're thinking of moving kind of beyond phase one and moving into that phase two and even after the phase two, keep a couple things in mind. The SBIR and STTR programs are often referred to as America's Seed Fund. And that is a very apt way to describe them. Anybody know the way that typical venture capital funding or third-party investment works? So usually you have what's typically like a phase zero or a seed. It's just an initial, hey, you might have something. I'm going to give you a tiny bit of money. Show me that it can actually work out. And then after you've established that, you've de-risked the idea, you go back to investors and you say, okay, well, I took that money and I showed that it could actually work out. Now I need a much bigger infusion of dollars to make the next step forward. I need to scale. I need to get ready for manufacturing. I need to get ready for distribution. Then you get into like a Series A, which depending on the industry, Series A funding is anywhere typically between, let's say, $5 to $10 million. Series B, you're typically looking at 25 to 50, and the money just goes up as you get further along and get further established. Now, seed fund obviously is just to get started. It's a little seed. You plant it, you nurture it, water it, give it nutrients, whatever farming prerogative you actually want to insert in there. That's how you take care of a seed. You germinate it, you let it grow, and then you harvest it. And that's what SBIR and STTR really do. They are just a way to get started. They're not really a way to get you fully into the commercial market. There has to be a plan for what's going to happen afterwards. Because if you're developing anything that requires actual, like making something, anything hardware related, overhead's going to kill you. You have to either set up partnerships for manufacturing or you have to actually create manufacturing lines yourself. And generally, when you're thinking of product development to go from one sort of MVP to, let's even say, making 1,000 units, you're probably talking $5-10 million. SBIR and STTR aren't going to get you there. Now, depending on the agency, you could capture maybe $4-5 million. Follow-on stuff, maybe a couple other $1 million, but it's never really going to get you all the way. And so that's why it's that seed, it's that start. And that's why you have to have an idea of, what am I actually going to do after this phase two? Phase two is going to get me to a point that I say, yeah, this is actually potential now. There's a good possibility here. I made something, people are interested, they want to buy it. Well, now I need to figure out how do I get it in people's hands. So a lot of phase two is that kind of culmination of what SBIR and STTR dollars are going to do for you. With some caveats, which we'll get into at the third presentation. So because of that, I'm going to skip these last two bullet points here because it's going to be a lot put to them. So when you're thinking beyond feasibility and making that transition from a phase one to a phase two, a couple things to kind of keep in mind. That phase two really is that validation and demonstration. You're transforming that idea into a reality. Phase one demonstrated that X is possible. Phase two, now you have to actually figure X out. But you also have to move beyond it. Because keep in mind that phase one was about one technical problem, one critical problem that you had to show could be solved. Well, now you need to tackle the other ones. You had that keystone, that linchpin problem that said, if I can't figure this out, we might as well stop right now. We'll go be greeters at Walmart because it's a steady paycheck. But now you have to actually figure out the other things, the ancillary things. You figured out that you could make this particular part. Well, now you need to figure out the chassis that it goes into. Now you need to figure out, what does the customer need this to look like? And how do they need it to actually function? What are the quote-unquote bells and whistles that's going to drive the value that they're actually going to flip into? I want to buy this from you and I want to buy a product from you. So even things like, you figured out you were able to make a new material. Now you need to show that you can produce it every time in the same way, every single time. Anybody that's done anything in material production or even just production knows that getting those carbon copies is probably one of the first big problems that you're actually going to face. You can make a drawing. Can you make the drawing the same exact way, same shading, same line depth, same coloration because you use this much pressure to draw this line? That's what you're having to do here. And it is a big, big, big step up. So yeah, again, look at the ancillary issues surrounding the problem. Doing things like you demonstrated that the widget was feasible. Now you need to look at, changes to sourcing of inputs, changes to manufacturing, changes to that distribution at scale. You're kind of really looking at the experimentation. You're showing those potential candidates and then you're choosing them to equate to what's going to be the best product. And you're going to hear me keep using that term product because that's really what your phase 2 is all about. Moving into product, moving from a engineering or a research firm or a development firm to a producer, to an actual, we make this that we ship all over the globe. We make this that drives $50 million of revenue for our company every single year. So that phase 2 should really be looked at as that kind of next step to realizing that finalized goal. Good way to think of it is it's kind of that plan to affect the future. And when you're looking at taking that leap from the feasibility of that innovative idea to an actual kind of next logical step, here's a couple things that people can actually look at, because a lot of times people struggle with, well, how do I move from that feasibility into what would be a phase 2 scope of work and what would be phase 2 scaling? So kind of gave an intro into this, but like you solved for X in phase 1, now you need to bring in the Z and Y, the things that are actually going to provide cascading issues, the things that actually provide that complexity that you need 2 years and $2 million to figure out, which is not just a number thrown out of the air. 2 million in 2 years is usually about what you can get from like NIH, particularly some DoD service components are roughly about 2 million in 2 years for a phase 2. And kind of here, think about, the way we look at a modern piece of technology. First, we figured out we can actually make LCD displays. Then you figured out that, well, we can shrink them and put them in a phone now. We can make them actually darker. We can make them so they have true black. We can make them so that we can adjust the brightness. It wasn't just we figured out we can make an LCD. Now you figured out the other things you can do for it. And that's going to be a really big component too when you actually are looking beyond the funding, because you're looking at how do you expand your breadth and your depth? How do you actually create a product line? Because at the heart of it, so I realized we didn't have an SBIR 101. I've done a lot of SBIR 101s. It's 11 different agencies that participate in the SBIR program. Out of that, 6 of them participate in the STTR program. And each one has different goals. Each one has different visions. Each one has different, supplemental funding, complementary funding that they offer. But each one of them is going to kind of focus on that, is what did you figure out now versus what do you actually need to figure out in the future here? And all of those agencies aren't interested in funding a phase 1. To be blunt, those agencies aren't interested in funding a phase 2. Those agencies are interested in funding commercial products. So it needs to make sequential order, and it needs to kind of make sequential sense as you're moving from that phase 1 to phase 2 to what would be considered a phase 3. Is this growing a product? Is this growing something we can actually turn into a product line? Is this growing something that we can have version A, and then later on we can have version B and people will buy both? Is this something that's actually introducing new upgrades? Is this a software package that we can add to step onto later? That's how agencies want their awardees to think. They want them to think scaling. They want them to think What else can I do? How can I make those tiny pivots now to actually get into new markets, new opportunities, to get new customers, to drive new value for those customers? So there are a couple of things that typically throw people off when they look at that process from the phase one to a phase two. And a lot of the phase one is your best guess. Most of the agencies require some sort of commercial information for that phase one. It's just your best guess. Here's a market. I think I can get into this market. We think we can capture a little bit of this. Here's the competitors there. I think I actually provide a different value than what those competitors do. So similar to the way that you're establishing feasibility in that phase one for the technical side, you're also establishing the feasibility for the commercial side. So when you go to make that phase two proposal, just like you had to ramp up the scale of the work and actually take that work into not just theory, but proof, you're going to have to do the same thing for the commercial side. You're going to have to actually give them this isn't my best guess, but here's my plan for actually getting into the market. Here's my market strategy. Here's my adoption plan. Here's how we're actually going to package this. Here's how we're going to grow our business so that we can go after these new lines. Here's where we're going to bring in business development officers. You're going to have to scale your business as well as the same time that you're trying to scale your product and trying to scale your idea. And again, just the plan to get into the marketplace needs to be there. It doesn't need to be actioned upon now, because why would you before you could do a phase two? You have an idea. You have a feasible idea. You haven't talked to your customers. You haven't shown them what it is. So you can't actually start to put a plan into place, but you can put the hallmarks for a plan together. And that's also why the buy-in becomes a lot more important when you go from that kind of phase one to a phase two, and then from that phase two to the quote unquote phase three arena. There's a big difference between I have an idea and I have something people want. And that's customers showing that they're interested. So the importance of things like letters of support, the importance of things like letters of commitment, the importance of things like partnerships that have actually been set up, maybe even credas that have been set up, and showing proof of those in your phase two package becomes a lot more important becomes a lot more critical into actually getting funded. Because again, agencies want to fund commercial products. They don't want to fund ideas. They don't want to fund those hopes and prayers. They don't want to fund the thing that you go, the field of dreams problem where you go, if I build this, people will buy it. If I build this, they'll come. No. How are you going to get there first? That's what they're looking for. And whenever you're putting together your phase two commercialization plan, for most agencies in your phase one, if you even have a section on commercial potential, because there are some agencies you don't even have that, you may have 2 pages. For DOE, that even requires a separate document. And guess what? It's about 2 pages. For your phase two, better be 10 to 12. Even some of the agencies require a minimum of 12 pages for a commercialization plan. Because again, they fund products. They want products to be out there because they want your business to grow. They want your business to thrive. They want your business to succeed. How do you do that? Revenue. You generate revenue. How do you generate revenue? Sell a product. You sell a product people want. You sell a product people will actually buy. You sell a product that people actually need. Let's actually take that away. Don't even think about the people want it. People need it. It will solve so many of their problems that they just clamor for it. That's what they're looking for when you're actually thinking about what does my commercial plan look like here for as I transition beyond this phase two environment into actually producing. So a couple things to actually think about as you're putting together that plan of action or that plan of attack for your phase two proposal. Each one of the federal agencies at least the SBIR and STTR agencies put out what's called a 5-year strategic. It's a document that's updated every, guess, 5 years. And it's a strategic plan for over the next 5 years. What are we going to do as an agency? What's important to us as an agency? USDA. What does the U.S. Department of Agriculture thinks needs to happen within that 5 years? Where do we think the biggest impacts need to actually come from? Where do we think the biggest innovations actually need to come from? Now, does that mean that you follow something in their 5-year strategic plan and they're going to fund you? Probably not. There are a lot of mitigating factors when it comes to what gets funded versus what doesn't get funded. If you line stuff up, though, with we want people to be here in 5 years. We want the state of the industry to be here in 5 years. We want the state of the art to be here in 5 years. Do you think that's going to give you a bigger leg up against the competition? Probably. You're saying that, hey, we recognize that. We match that. We want to be there with you. We don't want to watch you get to that 5-year strategic goal. We want to help you get there. That actually becomes very, I wouldn't say integral, but it definitely at least becomes very interesting to those agencies. How can you help them actually meet their 5-year vision and their 5-year plan? That's a lot more for the kind of granting agencies. For contracting agencies, it's important to realize or to pull together that information from that 5-year plan and realize what their shifting needs are going to be. Because for contracting agencies, your phase 2 is really going to be taking that validity and feasibility and changing it into something they can use. Contracting agencies want to buy products. They want to buy something from you to solve an issue that they have, solve a problem. They look for solutions. So what are you going to spend your phase 2 doing? Making sure you can produce the solution to the way that they actually need it. If you produce something that they can't utilize, good on you, but they're no longer your customer. They can't buy that thing from you. And that's what phase 2s, particularly for contracting agencies, are about. You gave me money to figure this out. Now I need to show you that I can make it to the way that you need it to be made. So then you can order 100,000 of these from me tomorrow, or 200,000, or 10 million units over the next year, whatever they're going to look like for their kind of contract and their solution procurement.
So the 5-year strategic plan, do we acquire a copy of that through FOIA for that particular agency?
Just online. You can literally just Google agency 5-year strategic plan. It'll take you right to it. They're all published. They're all public information. They're definitely all published. So just like everything else, like when I was talking about market information, you can go out there, you can go to one of those marketing websites like Market and Markets, spend $10,000 to get a marketing plan. That probably isn't going to be for you anyways. Or you can Google, because guess what they did? They Googled information and then charged you $10,000 for them Googling stuff for you. So Google, it's your best friend. Okay, so thinking also of that more along the lines of past phase 2, you're really looking at the scaling up for production, scaling up to actually be a business, and scaling up to be a business, and that matters. Now, before I dive into that, so what do I mean by be a business that matters? There is data out there that shows it has, shifted over time, but about 3 years ago, NSF did a dive through all of the awardees, and they showed that something like 95% of awardees were small businesses that have been in existence for less than 4 years, and on average had 3 to 5 employees. So those are small startups. Those are people just getting out of graduate school, people actually finishing their thesis, their PhD, people actually moving from a certain industry or a certain type of work and going, this isn't for me, I want to go do my own thing. And that's great. That gives you a start to be in a business. But how do you actually get to the point that you're selling 10, 20, $100 million of product every single year? Well, a 3 to 5 person team ain't going to do that. It's a lot more complex. A company that's been in existence for less than 2 years probably isn't going to do that. You're going to need to scale. And so that's what scaling here is actually looking at. How do you actually scale your company and scale your operations while you're trying to scale your work, while you're trying to actually scale the focus of that phase and the focus of that scope of work and the focus of that work plan that you've actually put together. So there's a big expectation that you're actually going to grow your company at the same time to be ready for that commercialization. So sometimes that actually means bringing on expanded talent and expanded technical talent. That gets you into the product development. That's really important. But people that produce products are typically not the same people that sell products. Scientists, the people that are the technical experts, they're not the ones that are actually the business development people. And I'm sure that there are some unicorns out there that go, I did both. That is awesome for you. 95% of businesses, though, the technical team is not the sales team, and the sales team is not the technical team. Two very distinct skill sets. I always equate it to people as the left brainers versus the right brainers. The technical people are data driven. The sales people are creative because they have to sit there and they have to not necessarily lie, but sometimes stretch the truth on exactly what happens to get people's interest, to gauge, are they interested? Are they engaging with me? What was the disengagement point? The technical people, the engineers just go, hey, here it is. Do you want it or not? The business people have to sell. So that's why a lot of your getting ready for that commercialization and going beyond that kind of phase 2 is really going to be about you have the technical people in place. Now you need to put the business in place. It's also why it's really important. Last week when we did the budget seminars, people heard me talk about don't cut into your allowances just to do work. They give you allowances to set yourself up as a business, like your indirect pool. Guess where you're going to pay for these things like business development people, like scaling your business, like actually starting to set up some manufacturing or distribution. You pay for it out of that indirect pool because it can't be a direct line item in your SBIR award. So that's why it's also very important to pay attention to your budget, pay attention to what you're actually paying for, and utilizing some of or any of the supplemental or complementary funding opportunities that we'll talk about 2 presentations from now. So again, the goal of that phase 2 is actually get to that production ready prototype. Something that needs to conform to customer expectations, needs to be ready for economies of scale. So economies of scale, it's very different to make one thing than it is to make 10,000. Your price goes way down, but your complexity goes way up. That's what you're actually shooting towards. And getting something like a production and distribution plan in place. Because, yeah, you get the economies of scale, you make the thing. How do you get into somebody else's hands? Are you actually doing direct sales? Are you doing a web front? Are you actually selling to somebody like Walmart who does the distribution for you? Are you knocking door to door like you're a vacuum cleaner salesman trying to actually get people to buy your product? What is that distribution plan and how do you actually put it in place? But again, it's often an unrealistic expectation to get to that point during your phase 2 because the money just only goes so far. And that's why you want to use those other funding vehicles like venture capital, phase 2 supplements, OTAs called other transactional authorities, the things that we're going to talk about shortly on the SBIR got me to this point, but now I really need to figure this manufacturing out. There's some grants out there. There's some opportunities for figuring out that commercialization readiness and that manufacturing readiness. And then, well, I'll talk about this real quick. Also, part of that phase 2 is actually going to be getting in that customer space, getting that customer selection, getting that push for information about What does my customer need this to do? I just talked about contracting agencies in your phase two, and part of that phase two is making your solution fit that contracting agencies need. Well, this is what that customer validation and that customer identification is all about. Even if you have an award from a granting agency, you need to do this activity. Story time. I used to work for a autonomous systems company, and we won an award to develop a ground solution for Department of Energy and their national nuclear security. They did qual shooting, needed to be so big, needed to run on a certain track, needed to be able to withstand whatever they call the sharding, whenever a bullet goes off track and hits something. Wanted to make sure that little shrapnel didn't actually go through the unit and damage the robot. We built it to spec, met the customer, validated the specs, got all the information from them, got all the requirements, built it to exactly the way they needed, delivered it, and man, were we proud of ourselves. Particularly since I had to drive the damn thing 18 hours to actually deliver it and flop it off the back of the rental van. But we delivered the product. 2 weeks later, called the customer up. How's it running? Oh, well, it broke down the first time we used it. Wait, what? We built this exactly how it needed to be. Got on the horn with them, went through their protocols, went through everything with them, just could not figure it out. Went and picked up the thing, verified that it was burnt out, built another one, tested it ourselves, and shouldn't have done this. Then we went back out there and actually told the customer, why don't you actually use this for us? What they failed to tell us is that before it got to where it needed to go, it had to climb a 60-foot hill. Guess what happens when you have a 600-pound ground robot try and climb a 60-foot hill before running around the track? It burns up. So we did not find this out from the customer. This is what your phase two is about. Seeing how it works, seeing it in action, getting that information. And that's what you're going to use also some of that stuff like indirect funds for. Why you go through programs that some of these agencies put together, like the I-Corps program. Getting out there and seeing it in action, having your customer show you their process, show you their workflow, live in their shoes. I've done a lot of I-Corps teams with university students and university faculty members, and I can't tell you how many times I've seen that, oh crap, moment on somebody's face when they go, I think this will actually fit what this person needs, and then they go walk out in the field and they go, oh, that ain't gonna work. You have to do these activities as you're thinking about do I have something customers going to care about? Which is the biggest aspect of that phase two that you need to convince reviewers about. Phase one was convincing them you can do some work, that there's some legs there. Phase two is convincing them that I can make a product people care about. I can make a product that people will buy, and I can make a product that will actually equate to sales for me. So just a couple of things here about growth and looking at actually building out your business during that, phase two and beyond. Personnel scaling is going to be an effort to bring in additional team members. So that's where you're not just focusing on that technical talent, but actually building the business itself. And it's not just building a sales and marketing department. It's also building things like the support department. May seem like a quasi thing, but those admin assistants that can actually help manage someone's calendar, it's really important to start to bring them in here, because it's going to get very overwhelming for a 3, 4, 5-person team as they try to be a $50 to $100 million revenue company. Resource acquisition also becomes a much bigger priority. Looking at those partnerships, looking at those agreements, actually getting things in ink, and not just a random conversation that you have with somebody at a networking event. Telling them, hey, it was great to meet you. What's this deal going to look like? Can we actually have a MOU in place? Just a memorandum of understanding. Being able to show that in a phase two proposal package, and even when you're looking at those beyond phase two funding opportunities, goes a long way, because you've actually put the skin in the game. And kind of thinking about sourcing that talent, there are a couple of really great programs out there for bringing in and acquiring that talent. A really great thing that people often overlook is things like accelerators or incubators. For the people online, there are probably, if you're in a different state, there are lots of incubators and accelerators out there. For people here in the room, you know, University of Hawaii has an incubator and accelerator program, or at least used to. We'll see if it's still operating in that fashion. There are other programs out there, like Maui Economic Development Board has internship placements, and people go, well, but I hire an intern and then they only work for 2 months. I don't get a lot of work out of them. Well, the thing you don't realize is anytime you actually bring in new employees, there is a statistic that you don't drive $1 of value out of them for the first 6 months, because they have to get introduced into your company. They have to find out what your culture of innovation is at your company. They have to get caught up to speed with how you do business. So sourcing things like that, maybe even doing things like sub-awards for a university, getting graduate assistants to actually work on the project while they're a student, that means that that 6-month timeline totally disappears once they graduate and they go, well, I need a job. And you go, I've already trained you. Here's the job. You lose that 6 months of just inability and that flex before they would actually be able to be effective for you. So don't discount things like internship programs, alumni networks that you can actually tap into. Those are all really great ways to actually kind of move forward, along with building a relationship with things like economic development organizations like HTDC. HTDC can help you find programs, can help you find, funding opportunities, can help you find those resources that you need. And then kind of thinking here of outreach, phase 2 is also a really great way to kind of decide the direction of your company itself. Can you do it yourself, or do you actually need to bring in other resources? What is our plan going to be for acquiring this talent? What is our plan going to be when 4 months from now, we've actually grown to the point that we need to bring in in-house counsel? We can't use legal counsel as a just cooperative effort anymore, or have them on retainer. We actually need somebody in-house. Who's the most interested, and how do you actually reach them when it comes to the customers? How do you start to build that kind of C-suite? Lots of awardees will start to create a strong business plan here, and that's a hallmark for what is an actual awardee. Who gets the awards versus who doesn't when it comes to phase 2s, are those supplemental phase 2s. And I can tell you that if you don't have a good business plan, particularly for something like a phase 2B for Department of Energy, you're not going to get an award, because I used to review those. And if I didn't see some very specific hallmarks, it was ones across the board. You want those 4s, you want those 5s in your scoring, because that gets you that additional funding. That gets you those supplemental dollars to continue forward and to get into the marketplace. So a couple just final thoughts here. When you're thinking about that phase 2 and even kind of beyond that phase 2, what you're really doing is you're taking that phase 1 idea, you're kind of doing that crank into 11. Just like Spinal Tap said, we made an 11 of this. It's better. I don't know what 11 actually does, but it's better than 10. And that's what you're doing when you're thinking about that phase 2. You're taking that phase 1 and going, we did some really great things in here, but now we need to actually wow people. Now we need to have that holy crap moment that everybody pays attention and listens to us. Don't neglect the scaling of the business and priority of solidifying the path forward and the team that will actually do that. I just mentioned that you'll have to have that information in stuff like phase 2Bs and phase 2Cs and your commercialization plan. There are a lot of reviewers that will actually focus on that. When reviewers review your phase 1, if they're a contracting agency, it's all internal. If they're a granting agency, they use technical experts. When it gets to a phase 2, every single agency, whether they're a granting or a contracting agency, brings in outside commercial experts. You convince the technical people in the phase one because you talk to engineers. Now you need to talk to business people. Now you need to talk to people like me that are going to actually go, this isn't a business plan. They don't know where their revenues are going to come from. They don't know their financing model. They have no plans for a team. Transitioning from that phase one to phase two is transitioning from, to put it blunt, it's like transitioning from a hobby into a job. And to transition into that job, you have to show that you're ready to perform a job. Businesses are ready to perform a job. You have to show you're ready to actually be in this business. And that's where a lot of that information about commercial potential, your market, your plan of action, having your channels, going through the Steve Blank business model canvas and actually being able to write that stuff down. That's the difference between getting rejected on the phase two and actually getting your phase two award. And then the thought is that you will move forward into the market at the culmination of the phase two. So even if you know that you're going to have to go after other sources of funding to get to the commercial market, to actually get and start to make sales, you still have to show that ramp way of, when I finish the phase two, I'm going to be here and I'm going to be ready. You can't say, well, when we finish the phase two, hopefully we'll find another $5 million somewhere to actually get into the marketplace. That ain't going to fly. You're not going to get that award. Plan around it and then find it. So when you're actually thinking about that, what does my phase two look like? Your phase two looks like commercial success at the end of it. And you have to write like it's going to be commercially successful at the end. Are you going to get there? Maybe not. But you're going to do your damn best effort to get there. And that's actually what counts here. And so one thing that just want to remind people about too, as you're thinking of Del, you just talked a lot about this transition from a phase one to a phase two, and I am scared. I do not know how to approach this. I don't know any of this information I have to put together. Where do I go to find this? A couple great programs for you. TABA is one of them that's actually SBIR funded that we will talk about in our supplemental and complementary funding. Another one that the state here runs is the SBIR program. It is a phase zero reimbursement for things like proposal assistance. So paying a service provider to actually help you write part of your proposal, paying someone to help you figure out some of your market opportunities, some of your commercial plan, some of your commercial content. They will reimburse up to $3,000 to anybody that you have to submit. Do you want to give a couple interest points for people on the HSBR program, Cindy?
Sure. Well, so the phase zero is actually for first timers.
Oh.
So if you're new to the SBIR program, you can apply for phase zero, which is if you hire a professional grant writer, we'll reimburse up to $3,000. And for the SBIRs, for awardee companies that are awarded the federal grant, the state will match phase ones, twos, and threes. We'll match phase ones up to 50%, up to $75,000, whichever is less, and the phase twos and threes will match up to $500,000, up to 50% of your award, whichever is lower. And then we also do a lot of projects, workshops, events, like this one that Gal is hosting. So yeah, please sign up for our newsletters at the bottom of our website, htc.org. I announce a lot of different opportunities and workshops. So also for tech companies.
For phase zero, is it only external reimbursements, like they feed somebody else to do something to help assist? It's not internal, like their own staff time? Okay.
Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah.
I'll make a thought, unfortunately. Helps pay other people.
Yeah.
Okay. But that's a program that the state offers, both the phase zero as well as the matching. Matching grants, Hawaii does it, a number of other states do it. On your matching grants, generally, you don't do technical work. That's what your SBIR award pays for, is that technical work. Your matching grant is for that commercialization work. It's actually going out there, doing demonstrations, doing travel to go to events, to actually get in front of people, to work with somebody, pay someone to help you put together a strategy, a plan, intellectual property protection strategies. That's what those matching grants actually pay for. Not for the technical work, because again, SBIR is for that. That's for that commercial. So anything I just talked about that people are like, I don't even know how I would approach that. Your matching grant will help that. Your matching grant will allow somebody to be paid by you to do that stuff for you. Don't pay them just to do it all though. You still want to be kept in the loop. You want to be like part of the team. You don't want to just go, Dell, here's $15,000, figure out my market plan. One, that ain't enough money to figure out a market plan. But two, that's also I'll put something together that may not be good for your business because it doesn't have your goals and your thoughts in mind. So any of this stuff, when you're thinking about how do I go out there? How do I seek these opportunities? How do I find these resources? How do I find these partnerships? Always make sure you are an active part of that conversation, because nobody else is going to have the best interest of your business at heart. You do. It's your business. It's your success on the line. So always be an active portion of those conversations. And I'm going to skip past this next slide because it was for an event that was a year ago. And that's like next session. So happy to take any questions, any comments before we roll into a 5-minute break before our next session. Yes.
Just curious, so you mentioned the private funding in the beginning, so I just wondered, has phase 2 award work with private funding together?
Yes. Even your phase 1 can award with private funding. Whenever you get an award, you're just putting together a very specific scope of work you're going to. And that actually happens with SBIRs and STTRs, but also if you get a procurement contract, if you get a outside grant, you give a scope of work and you say, for $150,000, we're going to do this. Now, if you want to bring in other funds outside of that to actually increase beyond the scope, to do something else, to actually supplement work, that's totally fine. Just as long as, as long as when you account for that, it's totally clear, totally, fine. Fraud, waste, and abuse is a thing. They will find you for that. But as long as you say, okay, we did this work, here's how we spent the money. If you need to bring in other funding, it's totally fine. And what you will find, particularly when we talk about things like phase 2 Cs or some of the other supplements on a phase 2, some of them actually do require third-party investment and in-kind matching in order to get those additional $500,000. Yes.
Hi. So I just had a question. I know there's a new executive director with HCDC. It's Chong Lam. I had a question with regards to SBIR. I know there's like different portfolio companies you'd see at SBIR.gov. For Hawaii, the state of Hawaii, did they actually have any use cases, previous successful companies that either a database or portfolio companies with the state of Hawaii through HTDC to look over? I think your company's based in Seattle, Washington or something, so I was just curious to know. Aeronautics space, that's part of Washington State. Hawaii is much more like marine biology. Obviously, the islands here. I'm just curious as to if you can speak about Washington State compared to Hawaii states in terms of their SBIR programs.
Yeah, so a lot of the assistance that you're going to find is very related to what goes on in that state. Like HTC operates under what's called a FAST award, particularly for their SBIR and STTR outreach, federal and state technology partnership. There is one in Washington. There's also one in New Mexico, which I ran for 6 years. And we focused on what was in that area, what was of interest, a lot of the backbone, particularly in New Mexico. We did a lot of energy work because having 2 DOE funded labs in the backyard lends itself to a lot of energy work. As far as the database, I believe, Cindy, that's the project that y'all are potentially working on, is a database of the awardees, and not just the awardees, because yes, on SBIR.gov, you can actually fill out a couple flags and pull up all of the Hawaii companies that have ever been awarded, but there's not much information beyond that.
I would say probably 99% of those companies that you do pull up probably got the match. For one of the other.
Thank you.
Any other final questions before we take a quick 5 minutes and get ready for intellectual property? That is the next one. Okay. Sorry, when you do 3 of these in a row, you forget which ones are going to be next. But we're going to take a 5-minute break and then we'll be back with intellectual property. And I actually do have a slide deck that did not disappear for that. So get ready for that.